Should Brits prepare for nuclear war?
Look, there's irresponsible rhetoric coming from Russia, and that is not going to deter our support for Ukraine. We're now on day 1,000 of that conflict. That's 1,000 days of Russian aggression, 1,000 days of sacrifice in Ukraine. We have stood with Ukraine from the start, and I've been doubling down in my clear message that we need to ensure that Ukraine has what is needed for as long as is needed to win this war against Putin.
Now, imagine a leader once hailed as a beacon of hope and change, only to crumble before the nation. This is exactly what happened with Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party, who suffered a visible emotional breakdown during a recent speech. It was a moment that stunned the country and raised serious questions about his leadership. How did someone expected to inspire fall into such a state? What triggered Starmer's public collapse? And what does it signify for Labour's future? Let's unpack this political drama and explore what it reveals about the turbulent state of British politics. Should the British prepare for nuclear war?
For the third year running, Putin did not attend this summit. He is the author of his own exile. And on day 1,000 of Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, I say again, end the war, get out of Ukraine.
Should Brits prepare for nuclear war?
Look, there's irresponsible rhetoric coming from Russia, and that is not going to deter our support for Ukraine. We're now on day 1,000 of that conflict. That's 1,000 days of Russian aggression, 1,000 days of sacrifice in Ukraine. We have stood with Ukraine from the start, and I've been doubling down in my clear message that we need to ensure that Ukraine has what is needed for as long as is needed to win this war against Putin.
Meanwhile, Starmer's attempts to project sincerity backfired spectacularly. His claim that 90% of those impacted by changes to the pension system were informed in advance not only fell flat, but alienated the public. Instead of addressing genuine concerns, he seemed to shift the blame onto those affected. The public saw through this, and trust in him eroded. At Labour HQ, chaos ensued. Emergency meetings, heated arguments, and a palpable sense of disarray. Advisors warned Starmer about the risks of doubling down, yet he pressed on, dismissing their counsel. This raises serious doubts about his judgment and whether he can effectively lead the party through these turbulent times. But that's not the whole story. Keir Starmer and the Labour Party are teetering on the edge of a deep crisis, one that threatens to erode the very foundations of the party. What if I told you that Starmer's next move would make his apologies seem trivial in comparison? Brace yourselves, because we're about to delve into a looming disaster within the National Health Service, one that has already inflicted serious damage on Labour's reputation.
Does he understand why the people of these islands, especially those of us in Scotland, treat him with such contempt?
Mr Speaker, before the election, this Prime Minister said he would lower energy bills by £300. Since he took office, they've gone up by £149. He said he would protect the winter fuel payment, but now he's in power, he's stripped it off our pensioners. And he said he lined up for many photos with waspy women, saying he'd have their backs, and he's just betrayed them in the most scandalous way possible. This is now the defining characteristic of this one-trick phony Prime Minister who says one thing and does another. In Scotland, the SNP are 16 points ahead in the polls. Does he understand?
Now think back to the ambitious promises Starmer made about the National Health Service during his campaign. He spoke of £3 billion in funding over 5 years, sparking hope across the nation. People eagerly awaited the much-needed boost for the NHS. Yet, when the financial reports were released, the nation felt a wave of shock and dismay. Those promises? Utterly unattainable. The country simply couldn't afford what Starmer had pledged. As reality set in, Starmer began retreating from his commitments. Those key pledges about the NHS, they vanished into thin air. Perhaps he hoped the public would forget his bold declarations, but such naivety only fueled outrage. NHS unions, already stretched to breaking point after their heroic efforts during the pandemic, felt betrayed and deceived. And who could blame them? Meanwhile, opposition parties seized the opportunity, launching relentless attacks with arguments Starmer himself had handed them on a silver platter. Labour's perceived credibility on healthcare is crumbling, with growing doubts over whether the party can be trusted to manage the NHS. Political analysts warn that this tarnished reputation on health issues could drag Labour down for years, leaving the party's credibility in tatters. It feels as though Starmer has delivered a devastating blow to one of the Labour Party's most enduring pillars, and this is just the start of a far-reaching crisis. Brace yourselves. Starmer is set to introduce a series of policy changes that will shock many and could ignite real rebellion within the party. The NHS may only be the first domino to fall, with more to follow in quick succession.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister needs to misrepresent me to make his point. I don't need to misrepresent him to make my point. Yes. The truth is, he didn't think this through. Cutting winter fuel payments isn't just callous. It may not make savings. It could actually cost us all more. And that's not the only policy which is making things worse. The Chancellor's budget is a body blow to family businesses and also charities. Marie Curie have warned that Labour's budget will cost them nearly £3 million a year. This is a cancer charity saying they have no option but to reduce services.
Starmer's decision to harden Labour's stance on immigration has only added fuel to the fire. This abrupt shift has sparked outrage among party members, with some left-wing MPs threatening to resign in protest. Progressive voters feel deeply betrayed, leading to a sharp decline in support for Labour. Starmer's attempts to balance competing factions have backfired spectacularly, leaving him teetering on the brink of political disaster. Meanwhile, the right-wing press is having a field day, relentlessly criticising his decisions, while he has alienated a significant portion of Labour's core base. This leaves him in an exceptionally precarious position. His efforts to unify the party are increasingly strained, and the internal tensions are palpable. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch has been unsparing in her criticism, describing Starmer's policies as a slap in the face for the British people. In her words, no more money without reform. I won't stand by while more of your money is wasted on agency staff, charging £5,000 per shift, on appointment letters arriving after the date, or on hospital beds taken up by people stuck there simply because they can't get community care. Labour's immigration policy U-turn has laid bare deep rifts within the party, testing its unity to the limit. The very future of the Labour Party now hangs in the balance, with the coming months set to be critical. As Starmer grapples with these divisive issues, the UK is hurtling towards a mounting financial crisis. Campaign promises that once inspired hope are unravelling under the weight of economic reality. The country faces soaring inflation, a shrinking economy, and a public increasingly disillusioned by broken pledges. Starmer's leadership is at a crossroads. Will he salvage Labour's reputation or sink it further into chaos? The answer may shape the future of British politics. The Labour Party's ambitious plans now seem less visionary and more fantastical. Rachel Reeves has been forced to unveil a budget that starkly departs from Labour's traditional commitments. No tax cuts, only modest spending increases, and even cuts to winter fuel allowances for pensioners. You've claimed you'd prefer a family member to die in the NHS rather than seek private treatment. No, I didn't say that. I did not say that. But you've said you'd choose NHS care over private care, which seems inconsistent. On one hand, you're leaning on private providers to cut waiting lists. On the other, how can you promise radical NHS reform while clinging to its current structure? Starmer responds, "My wife works in the NHS. She's at one of London's largest hospitals. My late mother was a nurse. Reforming the NHS isn't about abandoning its principles, but ensuring it works better for everyone. Still, Labour's policies are under fire. The increase in national insurance contributions for businesses has sparked outrage, with critics labelling it a tax on jobs. Both employers and trade unions argue it will lead to widespread layoffs and inflict lasting damage on workers. This has raised serious questions about Starmer's financial stewardship, drawing comparisons to Labour's turbulent economic history. But that's not the end of the story. Starmer is now navigating an even more perilous challenge: Labour's shift in foreign policy to strengthen economic ties with China. While intended as a pragmatic move to revitalise trade, it has sparked fierce criticism, with many warning it could backfire catastrophically. The question remains: can Starmer weather this storm? Critics are already questioning his ability to balance competing priorities and deliver on Labour's promises. What do you think of these developments? Share your thoughts in the comments. See you next time.